What if I told you that misery, the feeling you've been taught to run from, is not just a fleeting emotion, but a deep addiction? What if I told you that it's not your circumstances, relationships, or failures that bind you to suffering, but something far more insidious? A lie, so cunning and pervasive that it has woven itself into the very fabric of your existence. This lie doesn't just make you endure misery, it makes you crave it. Dostoevsky, a man who knew misery better than most, saw through this illusion. Born into a world of pain, stripped of his freedom, and condemned to the harsh cold of Siberian prison camps, he didn't merely survive suffering. He studied it. He dissected it, analyzed it, and ultimately uncovered its brutal truth. Dostoevsky realized that misery wasn't just a curse of existence. It was something humanity, in its twisted way, couldn't live without. You see, misery does something no fleeting happiness ever could. It gives life depth. It forces you to confront the void, to ask questions you'd rather avoid, to seek meaning where none seems to exist. But here's the cruel paradox. The very misery you loathe also gives your life its sharpest sense of purpose. In this video, we will dive into Dostoevsky's profound insights, exploring why we are drawn to suffering and how this dark addiction shapes our lives. You'll learn why misery feels so familiar, why happiness often feels empty, and most importantly, how to break free from the cycles that keep you chained. But I'll warn you, what you'll discover is not comforting. This is not about escaping pain or avoiding hardship. This is about facing the unsettling truth that suffering, no matter how much we try to suppress it, might be the very thing that defines you. Misery is not a new phenomenon. It is as old as humanity itself, etched into our earliest stories, our myths, and our sacred texts. Across time and culture, suffering has been a constant companion of existence, looming over kings and beggars alike. But why? Why has misery persisted? And why do we seem unable or unwilling to escape it? To answer this, Dostoevsky's life serves as a roadmap. Born in 19th century Russia, he lived through a world of extremes: abject poverty, political upheaval, and existential despair. Arrested for his association with revolutionary thinkers, he was sentenced to death, a sentence that was cruelly commuted at the last moment. That reprieve wasn't mercy. It was a calculated act to crush the human spirit, forcing him to endure years in Siberian exile. Yet, instead of succumbing to despair, Dostoevsky found a peculiar clarity in his suffering. He observed not only his own pain, but the pain of those around him. He began to see that misery was not simply a result of external circumstances. It was something people carried within them, almost willingly. Dostoevsky's great novels, such as Crime and Punishment and Notes from Underground, reveal this truth in brutal detail. In his stories, characters don't just experience suffering, they cling to it, nurture it, and sometimes even revel in it. The Underground Man, for instance, confesses to a kind of perverse pleasure in his misery, admitting that he would rather wallow in self-inflicted suffering than accept a world he cannot control. This idea of misery as an addiction is not unique to Dostoevsky. Ancient philosophies, from the Greeks to Eastern traditions, grappled with the concept of suffering. The Stoics believed that pain was an unavoidable part of life, and the Buddha famously declared that life itself is suffering. But while many of these traditions sought to transcend or minimize misery, Dostoevsky turned the lens inward. He asked a question few dared to confront. What if suffering isn't just something we endure, but something we secretly crave. This notion aligns disturbingly well with modern psychology. Studies show that humans are wired to focus on negativity more than positivity, a phenomenon known as the negativity bias. It's why bad memories linger longer, why criticism stings more than praise elevates, and why we often replay painful moments in our minds. Misery, it seems, has a gravitational pull. But Dostoevsky didn't stop there. He believed that our addiction to misery wasn't merely biological or psychological. It was existential. In a world stripped of higher meaning, misery becomes the proof that we are alive. It becomes the evidence that we are struggling, striving, and searching for something greater. Without it, life risks becoming empty, shallow, and unbearably hollow. This is why misery is so persistent, so alluring. It offers something happiness never can: depth. Pain forces you to confront the void, to ask questions about meaning, purpose, and existence itself. But here's the dark twist. It's not just that misery gives life meaning. It's that deep down, we may fear what life would be without it. This understanding of suffering was radical in Dostoevsky's time, and even now, it remains unsettling. Because if misery is not simply a curse but a craving, then the question is not how to avoid it. The question is, why do we hold on to it so tightly? Why would anyone cling to misery? Why would we nurture the very thing that causes us pain? At first glance, it seems irrational, self-destructive even. But Dostoevsky understood something about human nature that most overlook. We don't fear misery as much as we fear meaninglessness. Pain, no matter how agonizing, gives us something to hold on to. It reminds us that we are alive, that we are struggling, that we are fighting against something greater than ourselves. In Dostoevsky's works, his characters often find their deepest sense of identity not in happiness, but in suffering. Misery becomes their anchor, their proof of existence. Take The Underground Man, one of Dostoevsky's most infamous creations. He's a man consumed by his own bitterness and self-loathing, yet he clings to his misery with ferocious pride. He admits that he sabotages his own happiness, choosing suffering over comfort because, in his mind, suffering is real. Happiness, he believes, is fleeting, shallow, a facade that hides the true nature of life. This paradox, finding purpose in pain, is not unique to Dostoevsky's characters. It is something we all experience, even if we don't realize it. Think about the times you've replayed an argument in your head, dissecting every word, every gesture. Why do we do this? Not to resolve the conflict, but to keep it alive. Misery gives us something to focus on, something to feel, something to define us. But there's a darker side to this. Misery can become a kind of comfort, a twisted form of control. When you're miserable, you don't have to face the terrifying possibility of hope, because hope comes with risk. It comes with the chance of failure, disappointment, rejection. By choosing misery, you choose certainty. You choose the familiar. Dostoevsky saw this tendency everywhere, in individuals, in societies, in the human condition itself. He understood that we are creatures of contradiction. We crave freedom, yet we fear it. We long for happiness, yet we sabotage it. We want to escape suffering, yet we cling to it as though it were the last shred of meaning in an otherwise meaningless world. This is why misery is so addictive. It feels like truth. It feels like purpose. It feels like something we can control in a chaotic and indifferent universe. But here's the brutal truth. Misery is a trap. It convinces you that you are powerless, that you are a victim, that the world owes you something. And the more you believe this, the tighter the trap becomes. Imagine you're standing in a room with an open door. You could leave at any moment, but you choose to stay. Why? Because stepping through that door means facing the unknown. It means risking rejection, failure, and disappointment. Misery, on the other hand, is safe. It's familiar. It's a cage you've built for yourself. And even though the bars are open, you choose not to escape. Dostoevsky's insight into this paradox was revolutionary. He didn't just expose the trap. He showed us how to see it for what it is. He understood that to break free from misery, we must first confront the part of ourselves that is addicted to it. But here's the question: can we really break free? Can we abandon the comfort of misery and face the terrifying possibility of hope, of joy, of freedom? Or will we, like the underground man, choose to remain trapped, clinging to the very thing that destroys us? Why is misery so seductive? Why does it pull us in, even when we know it harms us? Dostoevsky believed the answer lay in the deepest, most hidden corners of the human mind. Misery is not just an emotional state. It is a psychological mechanism, one that provides a twisted form of comfort, purpose, and identity. Modern psychology offers insights that align eerily well with Dostoevsky's observations. The human brain is wired to focus on pain. It's a survival instinct, a way to stay alert to threats. But this negativity bias doesn't just protect us from danger. It becomes a lens through which we view the world. We hold on to negative experiences more tightly than positive ones, replaying them endlessly, as though misery itself were a puzzle we're desperate to solve. Dostoevsky captured this tendency with chilling precision in Notes from Underground. The underground man clings to his suffering, dissecting it, analyzing it, even finding a strange pleasure in it. He declares, almost defiantly, that he would rather feel pain than feel nothing at all. And this is the heart of the paradox. Suffering feels real. It feels authentic. Happiness, on the other hand, feels fleeting. It feels artificial, like a fragile bubble waiting to burst. When we're happy, we're vulnerable. We have something to lose. But when we're miserable, we feel grounded, as though pain is the only thing we can trust. This is why misery becomes addictive. It's not just a feeling. It's a story we tell ourselves. It's the narrative that defines who we are. Think about it. How often do we identify ourselves through our struggles? We say, "I'm the one who was betrayed," or "I'm the one who failed," or "I'm the one who was never understood." These stories become our identity, and letting go of them feels like losing a part of ourselves. But Dostoevsky didn't stop at the personal. He saw that this addiction to misery extended beyond individuals. It infects entire societies. In The Brothers Karamazov, he explores how people use suffering to justify their actions, to gain sympathy, and even to manipulate others. Misery becomes currency, a way to claim moral superiority or avoid responsibility. And yet, Dostoevsky also knew that misery, for all its allure, is a trap. It convinces you that you are powerless, that the world is against you, that there is nothing you can do to change your circumstances. It locks you in a cycle of self-pity and despair, feeding on itself until it consumes you. Breaking free requires a radical shift in perspective. You must confront the part of yourself that finds comfort in misery, the part that clings to pain as though it were a lifeline. Dostoevsky's characters often face this moment of reckoning, a point where they must decide whether to let go of their suffering or let it define them forever. But here's the brutal truth. Most people will choose misery. It's easier, it's safer, it requires no risk, no vulnerability, no effort to change. Freedom, on the other hand, demands courage. It demands that you step into the unknown, face the possibility of failure, and take responsibility for your life. The question, then, is not whether you can escape misery. The question is whether you're willing to. Because to let go of misery is to let go of the stories you've built around it. It's to strip away the excuses, the justifications, the comforting lies, and face the raw, unfiltered reality of who you are. And here lies Dostoevsky's ultimate challenge. Are you brave enough to confront yourself? Are you strong enough to abandon the cage of misery and embrace the terrifying freedom beyond it? Or will you, like so many before you, choose to stay trapped, clinging to the pain that feels like home? Let us now move beyond theory and into practice. How do you begin to dismantle the addiction to misery? What steps can you take to rewrite the narrative of your life? And most importantly, how do you embrace the freedom that Dostoevsky believed was possible? Dostoevsky's insights reveal a sobering truth. Misery is not just something we endure. It is something we often choose. But if misery is a choice, then freedom must be a choice as well. The question is, how do you begin to unlearn your addiction to suffering and embrace a life that isn't defined by pain? The first step is perhaps the hardest. Recognize the patterns of misery in your life. Misery thrives on familiarity. It's the argument you keep replaying in your head, the failure you can't let go of, the narrative you return to when things go wrong. Start by asking yourself, what story about myself do I keep telling? Is it the story of betrayal? The story of failure? The story of never being enough? Once you name the pattern, you can begin to break it. But recognition alone isn't enough. You must also confront the comfort you find in misery. This means asking a brutal, honest question. What do I gain from holding on to my pain? For many, misery offers a strange kind of safety. It allows you to avoid risk, to stay in the familiar, to justify inaction. But this safety is an illusion. It's a cage, and every time you choose misery, you strengthen the bars that trap you. The next step is to challenge the narrative. Misery tells you that you are powerless, that life is unfair, that happiness is out of reach. But these are just stories. What if you rewrote them? Instead of, I failed because I'm not good enough. What if you said, I failed because I took a risk, and that risk taught me something valuable? Instead of, no one understands me. What if you said, I haven't yet found my people, but I will? The words you use to describe your life shape how you experience it. Choose them carefully. Dostoevsky also reminds us of the importance of embracing responsibility. Misery often convinces us that we are victims, at the mercy of forces beyond our control. But the truth is, you have more power than you realize. Responsibility is not a burden. It is liberation. When you take responsibility for your choices, your actions, and your mindset, you reclaim control over your life. Another essential practice is to cultivate presence. Misery thrives in the past and the future. It feeds on regrets and anxieties. Pulling you away from the present moment, practice bringing your attention back to the here and now. Notice the small joys, the sunlight streaming through a window, the rhythm of your breath, the sound of laughter. Misery loses its grip when you anchor yourself in the present. Finally, embrace the discomfort of hope. Misery may feel safe, but hope is what propels you forward. Hope is risky. It opens the door to disappointment, to failure, to heartbreak. But it also opens the door to growth, to joy, to possibility. Dostoevsky's characters often struggle with this tension, torn between the safety of despair and the vulnerability of hope. Those who choose hope are not spared suffering, but they are transformed by it. Here's a simple exercise to begin shifting your mindset. 1. Identify one area of your life where misery dominates. It could be a relationship, a job, or a personal belief. 2. Write down the story you've been telling yourself about this area. Be brutally honest. What excuses or justifications do you use to stay stuck? 3. Rewrite the story. Replace the narrative of powerlessness with one of possibility. Commit to one action, however small, that aligns with the new story. Breaking free from misery is not a single moment of epiphany. It is a process, a journey of unlearning and relearning. Dostoevsky understood that suffering is inevitable, but misery is optional. The question is not whether life will challenge you, but whether you will rise to meet the challenge. And here's the ultimate truth. The freedom that lies beyond misery is not easy, but it is worth it. It requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to face the unknown. But it also offers something misery never can: the chance to live fully, deeply, and authentically. Everything Dostoevsky uncovered about misery leads us to this moment, the moment where you must decide. Will you continue clinging to the familiar pain that defines you, or will you dare to let it go? Misery feels safe, doesn't it? It's a well-worn path, a story you know by heart. It asks nothing of you but your submission. It tells you that the world is unfair, that you are powerless, that you are justified in your suffering. It offers you comfort in stagnation, but at the cost of your potential. Freedom, on the other hand, is terrifying. It demands courage, responsibility, and a willingness to step into the unknown. It asks you to abandon the excuses you've relied on, to stop blaming your circumstances, and to take control of your life. Freedom is not comfortable. It is raw, unfiltered, and challenging. But it is also the only path to authenticity. Dostoevsky's characters often grapple with this choice, and so do we. The underground man clings to his misery, finding a twisted pride in his suffering. Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment, wrestles with guilt and despair before finally embracing the possibility of redemption. These stories are not just fiction. They are mirrors, reflecting the choices we face every day. You now understand why misery is so addictive. You see how it roots itself in your mind, shaping your thoughts, your actions, your identity, and you also see that the bars of this cage were never locked. The door has always been open. The only thing holding you back is the fear of what lies beyond. So, what will you choose? Will you stay where it's comfortable, replaying the same old stories, clinging to the same old pain? Or will you take the first step towards something greater? This is not a choice you make once. It's a choice you make every day, in every moment. Freedom is not a destination. It is a practice. It is the willingness to confront yourself, to rewrite your narrative, to embrace the discomfort of growth. As Dostoevsky reminds us, life will always contain suffering. That is inevitable. But misery is optional. Misery is a habit you can break. The question is, are you ready to break it? Let this be your final reflection. If misery is what has defined you, who could you become without it?